As a reader, we remember most the first and last sections of what we need.
Wake your punk ass up. Warrior class, zoo, stand up. Warrior class, zoo, rise up. Warrior class, zoo, speak up. Warrior class, zoo, show up. Warrior class, zoo, smoke them out.
I've introduced this term of colonial agents, and I'm talking about not, it's not so much about individual Black women. It's about the social conditioning that Black women have. Now, Black men are socially conditioned as well. Our social conditioning, however, is more along the lines of disposability. At one point, we were at least valuable in terms of free labor. Now, with automation, I don't even know how much that's the case. But at the end of the day, we've never really been socialized much more outside of disposability. You have individual Black men that find themselves in positions of authority or achievement, but at the end of the day, we weren't really anticipated in that way. Positions we achieve in spite of, not because of anybody, going out their way to find Black men and give them opportunities. That's not how it is. So I'm not suggesting that Black women are socially conditioned and Black men aren't. We're just conditioned differently. And I argue that her conditioning, especially when we talk about the Gynocracy, is a little different. Hers, it comes with a degree of investment in a system that gives her access to things that many Black men never seen, not in terms of their own experience. So the first installment of this conversation, I talked about, early 19th century ideas about gender roles and the ways in which those ideas were absorbed in a very schizophrenic and problematic way into the Black community, particularly along the lines of women who had a degree of incentive and material incentive at that, to operate with some investment, operate with an idea that she could access society. She could access some degree of middle class life, right? That was the first show. The second show, we talked a little bit more about the degree to which she's able to function, right? Especially in terms of abusing the right to abuse, right? In other words, the way she's able to access society and use the kind of practices that go on in ways that others can't. So we talked a lot about abuse, and I showed a number of examples about abuse that are, by and large, or that tend to go unrecognized. Today, we're going to go a little in a different direction. I saw a number of articles that I've been seeing for years in a certain kind of way, but I thought it important that we actually look at. This was a piece I talked about before, and the thing about it is you'll find this article on a lot of different websites. It got a lot of play a few months ago. You can see dated in April, and I did a video on it in April talking about it because it was really strange, and I'll show you why in a second. It's entitled, obviously, Black women dying of COVID at higher rates than white men, right? And when you scroll down, there's an important, couple sentences that I want to highlight. So the first sentence reads, the analysis by Harvard's Gender Psi Lab found that COVID death rates among Black women are nearly 4 times higher than those for white men, 3 times higher than for Asian men, and also higher than for white and Asian women. And then there's one sentence in there that throws all of this into a strange space, kind of Twilight Zone-ish, if you will. The next sentence reads, COVID death rates among Black men are far higher than for any other sex and racial group, including more than 6 times higher than for white men. Now, what's interesting about that is it means that Black men's rates are higher than everybody's, including Black women's. But strangely enough, the Gender Psi Lab didn't find Black men as a gender worthy of talking about. So what does the article highlight? Is the conversation focused on the group that is suffering the most, or does it bypass them for some strange reason? And I said this before, the gender psi lab, right? Just like when you talk about gender studies, most of the time, most institutions don't consider men to be part of the gender, right? Gender is synonymous with women institutionally. Now, we know theoretically that's not the case, at least in concept, but realistically speaking, even when you take these courses in gender studies and you talk about gender theory, men, especially heterosexual men, not really part of the discussion unless you're talking about them in problematic ways, unless you're talking about them as the source of injustice for other groups. So this is one of the things I wanted to talk about today. The very particular type of media wars I'm looking at today actually have to do with the underdevelopment of Black men. They actually have to do with anti-Black misandry, or misandry as a whole as far as men are concerned, in media, but particularly media that points to serious issues, media that's considered intellectual in its framework, right? The ways in which even in the ivory tower, misandry is well accepted, so much so that it's not a term that's studied to any great length outside of Black male studies. You won't find institutes framed around misandry. You won't find a whole lot of theoretical work around misandry. You'll find the same names dealing with misandry, and it's a very short list. And it usually has to do more so with anti-Black misandry. And that has to do more with the works of people like Dr. Tommy Curry, right? And if you come to YouTube, you'll hear brothers like Green Gorilla, Dr. Ronald Neal, you'll hear BGS Ibmore, you'll hear myself talk about anti-Black misandry. But again, not a frequently used term, even in the academy, right? And that's kind of one of the things I want to point out here. Because when we start to talk about gynocracy, when we start to talk about colonial agents, what I'm saying is part of the reason that they're able to function that way, right, is because when we look at the ways in which men are underdeveloped and sidelined, there's no discussion about it, even amongst the intelligentsia. So this is just the first article. So this is one that we looked at a couple months ago. Here's another. So this one came out a few days ago. It lined up here. And it is entitled Adultification Bias. Adultification Bias, right? Investigation finds most children subjected to police violence are Black boys and girls. Seemed harmless enough. Could have said Black children, but doesn't matter. It's not a big issue. I was actually a little surprised they mentioned boys. So this comes out November 15th. So it's very new, right? I posted this on my, my Facebook page. And sometimes I like to do that just to see what the conversation is about it. So it talks a little bit about adultification. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but I'm going to see if I can pull out some choice moments. But the beginning paragraph reads, Black girls are at an increased risk of being harmed by police officers. Now, this is important. This is what set me off. When I first read it, I saw the title, and the title to me was, wow, okay, adultification. I know how important that is. I know how Black boys can tend to be looked at as adults, even as young or older than they are. Excuse me. These aligners sometimes make it hard to speak. Anyway, Black boys can be seen as older than they are as young as 4 and 5 years old, and they can be seen as adults even in their early teens. So, when it said Black boys and girls, I'm like, yeah, that's important. I'm glad we did that. But by the time you get to the very first sentence, you immediately see where the politics are, right? Black girls are at an increased risk of being harmed by police officers in investigation by the social justice focused newsroom the Marshall Project has found. I thought, okay, that's familiar. And I immediately thought of the piece that I just showed you on COVID and COVID deaths. But this is interesting. What's going on here, right? And matter of fact, yesterday, as I was preparing for today, I was watching one of Antonio Moore's, actually his latest video came out yesterday, in fact, and he did a live responding to an article on Black women dating down. And this was an article in The Atlantic. And I thought, this is interesting. Okay, so he's doing a second week on it. I'm like, all right, let me check it out. And of course, Moore is very good dealing with the data on, our economic status and whatnot. But one of the things that frustrated him about the piece was that this was fairly high level, right? A high level media magazine online that was dealing with this idea of black women dating down by dating black men, even though for the most part, the majority of black America is wealthless. And Moore talks about this all the time. The majority of our wealth isn't in the celebrity class. It isn't in the entertainment class. It's really amongst baby boomers with a home and a pension. That's the majority of our wealth. And, as far as the African-American community is concerned, right? So he was talking about how problematic it was that you actually have this article that's somehow suggesting that black women are in some economic stratosphere that black men are nowhere near. And that's hardly the case. If anything, if you look at the BLS data, black men earn more from 18 to 65 for those that are employed. What throws us off is that black men earn less when you account for incarceration. Like we're the only group of men that earn less, due to incarceration. Short of incarceration, we actually earn a little bit more. It's not dramatic, but it's a little more. But my point in bringing this up is that none of the data justifies an article in the Atlantic talking about black women dating down. If anything, it contributes to this ongoing narrative that somehow black men are inherently deficient and black women are inherently superior simply because they have vaginas. I don't know, whatever it is. But that's not the point I'm even bringing up in terms of Moore and his video. The point I'm bringing up is by the time he gets a few callers into his show, he encounters a couple of different women calling in, basically suggesting that either on one level, this is kind of true enough to take into account, or more importantly, right, that black men and black women are talking about each other in negative ways on equal terrain. And Moore said something very interesting. He said, ma'am, you're not going to find black men writing articles in the Atlantic about dating down when it comes to black women. You're not going to find black men at the Washington Post, New York Times, LA. You're not going to find them on major platforms. He said, you're not going to find black men who are being elevated and platformed by corporations, by platforms that are old and well ensconced in society, well respected, right? You're not going to find black men accessing those platforms and talking down about black women. We just don't. That's not happening. And one of the other things he pointed out about that is he said the article was actually written by a Caucasian man, but it was in response to a demand from black women. And that was the key component. And what you saw in his face was the frustration of hearing women calling in and saying, well, I hear black men on YouTube saying things about black women, and then you got articles like this, so it's a wash, it's all the same. It's like, no. A dude on his smartphone on YouTube is not the same as a hit piece about, really targeting black men on the Atlantic with the support of black women readers. Matter of fact, at their behest. Two different things. Now, what does that have to do with today? What does that have to do with this article I'm about to get into and what else I'm about to talk to you about? Well, again, the article that came out on COVID and black women's deaths came out of Harvard's Gender Sci Lab. And that article in itself, you can find all over the net, everywhere, reputable spots, journals, academic journals, places you never heard of. One sentence on how black men die even more than black women. I only heard one other article last year that even said that, and that one disappeared. So basically, two articles where it was listed. One article that was actually about black men, and the other article where black men were a footnote to the article, essentially. And yet, even the evidence coming out of Harvard suggested they died more than anybody. And nobody gave a damn. Nobody. So here we are talking about adultification. And this is an important issue, but yet and still, the very first line of the article lets you know, right, why this is an issue. Black girls are at increased risk. Now, it's not to say that I don't believe black women and girls should be talked about. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is if we know who's actually suffering from something, wouldn't they be the point of the article? You would think. So let's continue. Let's see. The investigation included an analysis of demographic and use of force data from 6 police departments and found that the majority of the 4,000 children subjected to police violence between 2015 and 2020 were black. About 1/5 of the children were black girls, while 3% were white girls. So 6 police departments, only 6 police departments, more than half of the 4,000 children impacted by police violence in the investigation were black boys. Interesting. More than half of the 4,000 children impacted by police violence in the investigation were Black boys, at a count of 2,200. Now, wait a minute. Am I missing something? This is strangely reminiscent. Strangely reminiscent. I mean, there's an acknowledgement that Black boys are in this situation, just like in the COVID article. They're mentioned. And it's always this strange little, one sentence, right? This strange little one sentence that you can see where, Black boys are mentioned, but that's it. Nothing beyond that. And I find that problematic and questionable. Yeah. But this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It makes you wonder, where is this coming from? What exactly is the idea that's being promoted here? What's the goal of all of this, right? So more than half of the 4,000 children impacted by police investigation were Black boys. But the very first sentence of the article, which frames what the focus of it is Black girls are at an increased risk of being harmed. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pointing that out, but clearly, if Black boys are on the receiving end of this more, right? Because out of those 4,000 children, what did they tell us? They said 1/5 of the children were Black girls. So 1/5 of the children were Black girls, more than half were Black boys. And what is the focus of the article? Studies have routinely shown that both Black girls and boys are seen as older than their same age peers. Research published by the American Psychological Association found that Black boys as young as 10 years old are seen as being responsible for their actions, while white boys of the same age are still viewed as generally innocent children. In 2017 and 2019, Georgetown's University Center on Poverty and Inequality found that Black girls are more likely to be subjected to adultification bias. Research showed that Black girls as young as 5 are assumed to need less protection and nurturing than white girls of the same age. Now, this is an important distinction. This is important. You will sometimes hear out of nowhere, right, sentences like this, right? Georgetown University's Center on Poverty and Inequality found that Black girls are more likely to be subjected to adultification bias. You'll also hear those kind of sentences when it comes to other things we're going to point out later. And they'll just kind of pop out of nowhere. They'll not be framed in any kind of real way. It'll just say they're more subject to it. But then at the end of the same paragraph, what they're more subject to, it just basically means that they're subject to it more than white girls. So Black boys would be subject to something more than everybody. Black boys would be subject to something more than everybody. Black boys would be subject to something more than everybody. Black girls, when you hear these kind of sentences, are often subject to it more than their female counterparts. I have a problem with the framing of the article. And I have a problem with who gets access to being able to have these articles discussed on major platforms and who is virtually ignored or is a footnote in a problem that he suffers from more than anyone else. I have a problem with that. So when I hear these kind of distinctions being made and not qualified, and it's done with a degree of manipulation, that sentence, they are subjected to, Black girls are more likely to be subjected to it. That's right there a problem. Because the way they're framing that, back to this, what I'm pointing out is just the manipulative way that the data is being presented and the platforms that allow this to occur while also leaving Black boys and men to serve as footnotes on issues they suffer from most. He says it's not a coincidence the article is stated that way to set the mind of the reader. We remember most the first and last sections of what we need. The first and last sections of what we need. The first and last sections of what we need. Absolutely. Absolutely. And these major platforms are hardly oblivious to that. They are well aware of how people read. They study how people read. You got to know the ins and outs of your business, and they are well aware how this reads, and they do it purposely, no doubt. But so anyway, when I talk about flat Blackness, I bring a gender component to it because I started to notice something in the Black community, most especially right around the time we started to see a rise in BLM and other similar organizations. And what I noticed was Black men's numbers, the numbers for what we suffer from, whether it's adultification, whether it's COVID, whether it's incarceration, whether it's poverty and homelessness, unemployment, whatever it is. I found that the numbers, right, that reflect the empirical data that reflect Black male life were used to great detail when it came to attracting attention to Black issues. But then there'd be a very particular kind of bait and switch that would happen, where the conversation would immediately switch to a demographic in the community that has less of an experience with something. But they're trying to transfer in some of the equity from Black men's experiences to add value to shifting the discourse to their experience. Again, I don't have a problem with us talking about Black women and girls going through something, but I do have a problem with the manipulative use of the Black male experience only to leave Black men themselves as footnotes or completely absent from the discussion as soon as you've gotten the attention you need or choose to want. That's the problem I have with it. And these kind of articles are problematic like that. I'm talking about the ways in which Black men's experiences are used to attract attention and Black men are discarded once the bait and switch can occur and the conversation can now be refocused on Black women and girls. This is not an easy discussion to have because coming up in the Black community from the 70s to now, we were initially taught that Black is Black. We talk about the Black community kind of as this homogenous entity. But then as we started to get to gender ended up becoming solely women and girls, and LGBT kind of popped out of that and were able to kind of build out of there. And somehow talking about Black men became synonymous with patriarchy and negativity and toxicity. And then there was these recasts of the 60s and 70s activist era as nothing but misogynist spaces where men just dominated and oppressed women and girls. And then you started to hear post 2015 that we need to have organizations led by women and LGBT because Black men owed those two groups because of how oppressive they were. And they needed to step back and let those groups lead. And they needed to be silent and follow. You started to hear all of that. But one of the ways these groups maintained getting people attracted to what they were talking about was to first lead with Black male deaths. That's what got people's attention. And then they switched the conversation. And so we're still seeing that. This sentence reads, the APA study found that among police officers in urban areas, overestimating a person's age based on racial stereotypes was associated with dehumanizing stereotypes, which were then linked to increased violent encounters with Black children in custody. Black children in custody. If you're talking about an issue and the group that suffers from it the least is foregrounded in the discussion, there's probably something wrong with that. And the example I gave was breast cancer. We know roughly about 2 to 4% of breast cancer patients or breast cancer victims, or whatever term you want to use, in the Black community, especially among adults, of course, are Black men. But Black men are never the face of breast cancer. It's an issue that overwhelmingly women suffer from. And what I find interesting is there's never a push to focus on Black men and boys, especially in areas where they are the least to suffer, like breast cancer, right? We don't talk about that. That's not part of the discussion. We don't make Black men the face of breast cancer, and I'm not arguing we should. In fact, I do think Black women should be the face of it because they suffer from it far more. But strangely enough, it's okay to remove Black men from actually being the face of what they experience the most. It's okay to remove their face because by the way, they're just oppressive, they're just toxic patriarchs and whatever. And then we have all these kind of, rhetorical dismissals of the Black male experience that sound justified, especially if you've taken a few courses and been indoctrinated into gender. If you've taken a few courses and learned enough about gender studies, that somehow it's acceptable to erase Black men and to do so with a certain vigor, a certain excitement, right? So when I see terms like Black children, yeah, I get why they're using it because the article highlights how both Black boys and girls suffer from adultification. But first of all, you got a study that only grabs 6 police departments and it's only focusing on 4,000 kids. But all right, 4,000 is a fairly good sample, but only 6 police departments it's already suggests you kind of doing something with the numbers, but whatever. But even out of that 4,000 kids, it's only a fifth of girls and over half of boys. Now remember something. Right? Black community, roughly 13% of society. We're fairly small. Fairly small. Black boys, Black girls, not a huge percentage of America, right? But yet and still, when you have such a small group where the boys are over half of the group that's targeted and the girls are a fifth, Black boys can't even be the face of that. They can't be the focus. So now we're talking about Black children. And this is what I meant by flat Blackness, right? That's what I meant by flat Blackness. You flatten out the experience to where now all of a sudden everything's the same, right? Because Black girls and boys both suffer from it. It's just a Black children issue. But it's acceptable as long as we have a dynamic that supports the disproportionate representation of women and girls at the expense of boys and men. Although Black boys are more likely than all other children to face discipline through suspensions, expulsions, and school arrests, the disparity in disciplinary action between Black and white girls is larger than that between Black and white boys. The paper found that in New York, Black girls were 11 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. Now, I want you to see the kind of tap dancing that's going on here, or I should say the gymnastics. I want you to see the kind of mental gymnastics that are going on here, right? So they admit at the beginning, and it sounds like they're being truthful, right? Black boys more likely than all other children to face discipline through suspensions, expulsions, and school arrests. The disparity in disciplinary action between Black and white girls is larger, right? So really the focus of the sentence is how much larger the disparity is between Black and white girls who are punished. And essentially what that means in a nutshell is that white boys get in more trouble than white girls. And so because there's a disparity that highlights the differences that much more between white girls and Black girls, that's the problem. But I want to show you something. The chart is entitled Look at Race and Gender, Out of School Suspensions. African-American boys and girls have higher suspension rates than any of their peers. 1 in 5 African-American boys and more than 1 in 10 African-American girls receive an out-of-school suspension. Again, am I saying Black girls shouldn't be talked about or any other group? No, not at all. However, the bait and switch is my issue. The politics, right, is my issue. The agenda behind how the articles are framed is my issue. And ultimately, the disposal of even the conversation around Black boys and how they're treated is my major issue. The disposal around Black boys and how they're treated is my major issue. The disposal around Black boys and how they're treated is my major issue. My point here is that Black males are almost double everybody in terms of suspensions. Think it's any different for expulsions? But the point I'm making here is when we see that when it comes to suspensions, Black boys on this chart are the red line. And basically it shows that they have rates of up to 20% in regard to suspension. The second highest group are American Indian boys at 12%. Among the girls, Black women are at 11%. Now that is higher than all the other girls, and it's almost twice as high as white girls. But it's almost half of Black boys. Now, the way that other sentence I read earlier was framed, I want you to hear how it is while looking at this chart. It was framed by saying Black girls are disproportionately subject to X, Y, and Z. When in actuality, what they're saying is they're subjected to it in relation to white girls. They've completely eliminated the other half of the chart. They did not want to compare it to the experiences of boys, most particularly Black boys. And so now you have a Black organization that is putting out information on what we need to pay attention to and what's important in the community that's not being given enough light, actively sidestepping and suppressing information about boys.
Boy, that was a mouthful. So what was all that about? What was all that guy was trying to get at? That guy's name is Dr. T. Hassan Jhonson. Again, his name is Dr. T. Hassan Jhonson. And like he kept saying, he is a teacher and he teaches at a college. And his job is basically to do what everybody else is out here trying to do. We're trying to find a solution to end racism, white supremacy, and how to go about doing it. Because as they say, Black people are not all a monolith. So since we're not all a monolith, we all have to attack this or slay this particular dragon any way we can. We have to hit it at multiple directions so we can put that work in. He said a mouthful, and I didn't really want to interrupt. I wanted you guys just to hear, at least you can get that part out. It's basically, if I can summarize it's how they're using the newspapers, print media, to skew one's point of view of the facts, the data, the statistics, and the information. I did print out the information so I can read it myself and go over it so I can better understand it and better talk about it. when he spoke about black women dying of COVID-19 higher rates than white men. The reason why they're pushing a narrative to cater towards the women is because, like we learned in many lessons, they cater towards the women because your women are your teachers. So she's basically tasked with the job of colonizing the minds of the children. What that means is getting them to think that white is right, getting them to think that it'd be in their best interest to do what is told to them by all members of the white society, starting with their mother, meaning mom's got your best interest. So I know the man went in the video and he tried to explain it. He did read the article, and you can hear me making paper noise that I have the article myself. But I wanted you guys to pay close attention to where it says research analyzed COVID-19 deaths rates in Michigan and Georgia, the only states reporting data by race, age, and sex. This analysis complicates the sample narrative that men are dying at greater rates of COVID-19 than women, said lead author Tamara Rushkovic, a doctoral candidate in population health science at Harvard University. This analysis by Harvard's Gynocracy lab found that COVID-19 deaths rates among black women are nearly four times higher than those from white men, 3 times higher than for Asian men, and also higher than for white and Asian women. You need to focus on what they're the comparisons. When white supremacy racism does these things, these are psyops. These are signs and symbols. This is white supremacy code. They're comparing black women to Asian men and to white men. So in general, they're comparing the black woman to men. And these men are also part of the world power structure system. So you, the reader, you, the listener of the video, you need to figure out and ask the question, why are you comparing the women to the men? Because it's symbolism. These 3 individuals, they're running the world. These 3 individuals, they dictate what says, what goes, who says what, and blah, blah, blah. That's a comparison. That means when you're looking at power, these are the ones you need to knock off. White men, Asian men, and black women. The problem is that's not a real image. It's white man, and white woman. Asian men second. But if you're not doing your studies, if you're not focusing on trying to get justice, if you're not focused on trying to get the truth, then you're going to miss what they just did. Analysis at Harvard's Gynocracy lab found that COVID deaths rates among black women are nearly 4 times higher than those for white men, 3 times higher than for Asian men, and also higher than for white and Asian women. But you guys I need you guys to listen to how they trick your mind. They already know you're not going to read it.
As a reader, we remember most the first and last sections of what we need. As a reader, we remember most the first and last sections of what we need. As a reader, we remember most the first and last sections of what we need.
They already know as soon as you see black women dying of COVID-19 at higher rates than white men, they already know as soon as you see the black woman trope, you're going to already fall into a Captain Save-A-Ho. They already know you're going to turn into that personality. And that's them catered, like it's like a dog whistle. It's like Pavlov's dog. It's a signal. It's hypnotics. It's hypnosis. All they need to do is get out certain trigger words, certain phrases in order for you to go into protection mode, regardless of the facts, the data, the statistics. But so most of you, and that's like 90% of you, are not going to read. This is the key point that you should have read. COVID death rates among black men are far higher than any other sex and racial group, including more than 6 times higher than for white men. COVID death rates among black men are far higher than any other sex and racial group, more than 6 times higher than for white men. So when the gentleman, Dr. T. Hassan Jhonson, was doing all of that talking, what he was trying to explain to you guys is that black men are suffering the absolute most in all areas of people activity. That's education, that's entertainment, that's economics, that's labor, that's law, that's politics, that's sex, that's religion, and war. Black men are suffering the absolute most in all areas of people activity. But the reason why many of you are not running to the assistance, save black men, help black men, is because when I do another comparative study, Do Black Women Hate Black Men, by the author A.L. Reynolds III. Again, this is a book. Do Black Women Hate Black Men? By author A.L. Reynolds III. He goes here and says, black men have low self-esteem because they grow up in a female-dominated environment. Over 58% of all black households are headed by females. The head of the household, usually the mother, explains that the family is willing to help the black female attend high school and college instead of the black male because the family does not want the daughter to end up working as a domestic. The rationale that emerges from my focus group is that the black male can fend himself. The black male can fend himself by the time he is an adult. The black male can fend himself by the time he is an adult. And that the black female cannot. So they're not willing to help you. Now they're going to use abuse. They're going to use sex. They're going to use gender. They're going to use whatever they can use, whether it's part of the LGBT community, whether it's part of sexual abuse, whether it's part of economics. They're going to use any kind of thing they can use in order to get ahead. When you're speaking of the Willie Lynch letter and you're pitting the young against the old and the male against the female, this is what they're doing. But you need to understand this is internal just as much as it is external. So not only is it happening via the outsiders, white supremacy, racism, it is also happening because of internal issues, meaning white supremacy, racism doesn't really have to lift the heavy hand to do all the heavy work. You have women already in the ranks that already feel that way. And it isn't because they were molested. It isn't because somebody mistreated them. It's simply because they're trying to survive. In the system of white supremacy racism, when you are a target, that female can go anywhere she wants. She can do what she wants via the vagina. So if it means sacrificing the males of any class, whether it's the homo class, whether it's your warrior class, or whether it's your rich class, if it means sacrifice their males, they're going to sacrifice their males in order for them to survive. The problem that I'm trying to explain to you guys is if you black males do not come together and form an agency to protect black men, everybody will contribute in the annihilation of black men. Again, they know you're not going to read the article in depth. They also know your reading comprehension isn't where you think it is. They know your barbershop talk is top notch, but they know your reading comprehension is not where it ought to be. And they also know you do not have the ability to cross-reference other works of information via it be correct, true, or via it be incorrect, false. They know you're not putting in the work. They know you are high school dropouts. They know you are elementary school dropouts. They know you are ex-cons. They know you are ex-drug addicts. They know you are ex-whores. They know everything about you, but you don't know anything about them. So they can afford to get out here and trip you up. Family, but understand how this works. You guys got to come to class, and you got to come to class every day, because we're out here and we're trying to school you guys. We're out here and we're trying to teach you guys. It isn't a fact of the matter that where our information is skewed. It isn't the fact of the matter that we only talk in white supremacy racism. It isn't the fact of the matter that we're trying to fix it. Reason why you guys are not participating is because you don't want to do the work. One, you don't want to do the work, but you don't want to do the work because you are all afraid of the repercussions. You are all afraid of losing a job. You are all afraid of being bumped off as you walk down the street by a stray bullet. You are all afraid of being incarcerated, and then when they get you behind enemy lines, they can terrorize you in ways that only your nightmares can make fun of. You are all afraid of that. And because you are all afraid of it, then that means you're less likely to participate. You don't want your name on a sheet of paper. You don't want your voice on the phone. You don't want your face in a picture. You don't want to be involved at all. And because of that fear allows them to run over you. Warrior class, Zoo, show up. Warrior class, Zoo, speak up. Warrior class, Zoo, stand up. Warrior class, Zoo, smoke 'em out. Black power.
Fair Use Act disclaimer. This site is for educational purposes only. Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowances made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, education, and research.